Before I start, I'd like to wish a wonderful, happy Father's Day to all the fathers, grandfathers, and those who cared for you wonderful graduates. Happy Father's Day. I am not wearing a cap because I have so much hair that it interfered with the putting on of a cap, so you'll have to excuse me. To those who are thinking, what's he doing up there? It started with a lunch with our chairman, David Myers. David, I'm quoting it, Meyer, would you be our commencement speaker? Meyer, no. David, why not? Meyer, I have nothing to say. David, I bet with all of your experiences, you have something worthwhile to say. Meyer, so I thought, I'm essentially a businessman. What am I going to tell a group of highly intelligent UCLA history graduates? Do I say, go forward, do not look back? Hell, they're history majors. They're trained to look back. But I did say, well, David, you know, in fact, history has saved my ass. David says, gee, that's a great title. I say, if you let me use that, David, I'll agree. Thinking, no way. David says, fine, I shall email you the date and time. Me, oh my, what have I gotten into? So we start. It's November 1961. That's 53 years ago. I just became president of this very small contract drilling company to the oil industry. The drilling contractor, the company owns the drilling rigs and employs the people who operate the rigs. The operator, the oil company, such as an Esso or Chevron, they hire the contractor to drill a hole on their property. Mind you, at that time, I knew as much about oil and gas drilling as I knew about brain surgery. The overwhelming majority of the company's assets and income, and thus mine, resided in 9 drilling rigs that we and our lender were running in Libya for various major oil companies. The rigs were operating throughout Libya, and our office compound was in Tripoli. Libya is about 4.25 times the size of California, or 2.5 times larger than Texas, and most of it is bleak desert. It's bounded on the east by Egypt and on the west by Tunisia and Algeria, and its population at that time was approximately 2 million. Well, I became president in October, and 1 month later I was off to Libya. Part of my inspection trip included 2 days in our headquarters and residential compound in Tripoli. And so I spent that Sunday in Tripoli with the Libyan gentleman who was in charge of labor relations with the native Libyans. He was an intelligent, educated, and cultured person who offered to show me some of the wonderful Roman ruins on the Mediterranean coast. I learned that our managers never spoke with him other than what was required for business purposes, nor did they socialize with any of the Libyans. It was beneath our Western managers to befriend, quote, a raghead. Thought that was horrible. Well, he showed me the ruins of Tripoli, and I asked him about the history of Libya, its economy, its politics, who was truly in charge, and where was the country going. I learned that King Idris was old, frail, and that several factions were rumored to overthrow the monarchy. My Libyan history teacher further told me that all of the groups rumored in takeover coups were anti-Western and would be despotic rulers. After a harrowing experience in a tiny single-engine plane, it was time to go home. I arrived home with the following realizations. In awe of the Roman genius in the building of their cities, never to fly in a single-engine aircraft over vast uninhabitable areas, and the decision to to sell our business in Libya. I arrived home on a Saturday night and on Sunday took a hike in the hills with my dear friend who was a plant biology professor at UCLA. After the hike, I told Rini I was much concerned because the hills were so dry and I could feel a Santa Ana condition. Went to work Monday morning, but left at noon to evacuate our children because of what came to be known as the Bel Air fire was threatening our home in Brentwood. Some of you may recall that fire destroyed over 500 homes on the west side. However, during that morning, I told our drilling executives that we would sell our Libyan business. They thought I was nuts and that I would severely damage our company. It took several years, but we sold our Libyan business to a large French industrial combine. 2 years thereafter, a coup led by a man called Muammar Gaddafi seized control and nationalized the oil industry. All the oil companies had to surrender their oil fields and leases, and all the drilling contractors had to leave their rigs and depart the country. For many of the drilling contractors, it meant going out of business or bankruptcy. And had we remained, it would have been disastrous for us and maybe bankruptcy. Thus, my life was significantly altered because of my interest in history and its teachings. History saved my fanny. Now, it's 10 years later, a decade in which we grew our domestic and offshore drilling business. While returning home from a business trip to Southeast Asia, where I visited our offshore jackup rig in the Java Sea, about 30 miles east of Jakarta, I reflected on our company's past and possible future. Business was excellent. Oil was at an all-time high. There was extreme and wild-like demand for drilling rigs, and even old and highly used rig components were fetching not-to-be-believed prices. I began some historical research on the number of working rigs, equipment prices, oil prices, various correlations, time periods, booms, busts, and recoveries. We were part of a highly cyclical industry with extreme volatility, subject to pricing mechanisms over which we had no control. Oil and equipment prices were at all-time highs. We were riding the biggest boom in our history, and every time in the past, these conditions resulted in a collapse that took a decade or two to recover. My decision was easy. My industry friends and coworkers questioned my sanity, for they all said, "This time is different." Well, despite the easy decision, the thought of total disengagement was troubling. If we sell everything, what happens to our good people? Happily, my concern was groundless. All of our people who wanted to remain in the drilling business received excellent employment offers. And the few who wished to remain, well, we could use them in our other business. We received sensational prices for all of our equipment, including junk that was destined for scrap. Within 1 year, the boom had peaked. And within 2 years, the domestic contract drilling industry was in the worst decline it had ever experienced. New equipment was almost worthless, and it took well over 15 years for the domestic land drilling business to recover. That sale was a major, significant, positive event for us, and we would never have achieved what we did if we had not sold. Again, history was my savior. Well, we invested the majority of the sale in an electronic venture, which tripled in 4 years, and the balance of the sale dollars was used to expand our recycling subsidiary. When we sold the electronic venture, we invested those proceeds in our recycling business. Why the recycling business? History was shouting to me that our nation must learn to recycle, that recycling does not become obsolete, that new technology improves recycling, and that recycling best occurs where the waste originates, here and not overseas. Our EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, has increased 25-fold since 1978. Without compounding, that's an average increase of 70% per year for 36 years. Thus, rather than using the Luskin name on the rising Conference and Residential Center, it should be called the Conference Center by History. Thank you. One non-personal anecdote of history and life. Our country invaded Vietnam. We wounded, maimed, killed, and destroyed the lives of millions of Vietnamese. We also wounded, maimed, and killed hundreds of thousands of Americans, and we bled our land. What did we accomplish? Did our leaders know anything about the Vietnamese people? Did they know that the Chinese had invaded and occupied Vietnam for 1,000 years? And during all those years, the Vietnamese rebelled and fought the Chinese and finally expelled them. The French occupied them for about 100 years. But despite the huge loss of lives, the Vietnamese ejected them. There is no people more determined to keep their independence, at whatever price. Was it not apparent, if one truly studied their history, contemplated their culture, understood their psychology, that they would absolutely fight forever for their independence, that they feared no invader, and were willing to sacrifice everything for their independence? What was the basis for our decision to invade? When one looks at the historical evidence, the stupidity and arrogance of our leaders were colossal. I have been talking about the past, but the intent of my remarks is the future. However, one cannot conceive the future without knowledge of the past. I quote the historian E.H. Carr, quote, "The historian, as we have seen, is bound to generalize, and in so doing, he provides general guides for future action which, though not specific predictions, are both valued and useful." And from Jacques Barzun in his From Dawn to Decadence, quote, "To all whom it may concern, every thought or act we have relates to the past." Also, and I don't know who first said it, but I completely agree, quote, "Great captains should be good historians." Therefore, to my point, we must make better use of our past knowledge to have a better future. The best basis for choosing the path to the future is to know the roads that brought us to the present. To the history of the past, you add some creativity and probability, and so now you can find the yellow brick road. Note of caution: when you examine the past, you need to recognize the basic forces and correlations, eliminate the superficialities, and along the road, you must be open to course corrections. I do need to share an example with you from the animal realm. The matriarch of an elephant herd, which is a micro-society, is the leader because she is the best historian. The herd follows her because she remembers where the watering holes are located. She knows the paths to get there. She knows nature signs, when to migrate and how to navigate, and she knows where to rest and when to be wary. Without this historical knowledge, there is no survival. You, our graduates, must learn how to combine historical knowledge with a sense of probability, a spoonful of creativity, and a sprig of courage. Nothing to it. I'm now heading for the straightaway leading to my finish. So now, the obligatory message to the graduates. But in addition, I present a challenge to our history department. To you graduates, don't become the cobbler whose children go shoeless. Use your training to study and synthesize the history of the problem that you are addressing. It's not just knowing the facts, that the Treaty of Ghent was in 1814, or when did the Boxer Rebellion take place, or the First Council, Nicaea, but understanding the conditions, reasons, and consequences of those events. There exists a chest of historical data for every type of problem. For your future, it is not the fact that the study of history creates knowledge that is important. What is important is how you assemble and use that knowledge. Finally, my challenge to our department, which is essentially what I have been saying. We must look more comprehensively and analytically at our history for possible solutions to our national and local problems. If history departments do not create more value in return for their funding, their financial support will only become nominal. How much longer will the sources that fund you, you who ask to be supported in your pleasures of study, continue without an implication of some return? Those others who are competing for the same funds, they promise cures, longer lives, new materials, entertainment, you name it. So why should society pay for your fun when society does not have enough money to solve its problems? If our history department in the future is to be special, outstanding, and in the vanguard of our discipline, we must be more than exceptional chroniclers of the past. History tells me that we must offer help for our future. If we wish to be valued in the future, we must offer help. Society will say, how much value is history if it's only for historians? I have discussed these thoughts with our chairman, Dr. David Myers, and our discussions have led me to the following. Given your support, I shall endow a chair for translational research in history and urge our university leaders for help in establishing a center within our department which will develop approaches, viewpoints, or answers to the questions our governments are facing. We shall not take on the mantle of policymakers. Rather, we shall offer help to our elected leaders in a form of probabilistic knowledge attendant to the problem. Our officials do not have the training, time, and decades of familiarity with the enormous store of knowledge pertaining to the complex issues they need to resolve. They need a complete palette of possible answers to a question, and someone needs to give them all those colors and shades. As David Meyer stated, quote, history has much to contribute to the betterment of society. But in order to thrive, the practitioners should be prepared to translate their research findings into tangible sources of knowledge. I believe UCLA's Department of History should be the pioneer in bringing pragmatic historical knowledge to our executive and legislative leaders. This proposed center will not diminish all the other areas of historical study. In fact, it will enhance the need for and importance for their more specialized studies, since they will be the source of thoughts and examples. The center shall need a director who is outstanding in identifying national and international trends and forces, and then be able to correlate these movements with data from the past and by adding some creativity, serve up a menu of responses from which our elected leaders can choose the likely dish. This director should be comfortable with developing courses, seminars, and attracting scholars of a similar nature. This center will be renowned for research, teaching, and publishing the applicability of history in our lives. However, without the sincere support of the university and the department, the center will never be great. Well, I've told you how history has enhanced my life and how it can do the same for you, our future-facing graduates. And in addition, I also offer a proposal of how history might save society's assets. You graduates, on this wonderful day of great celebration, do not forget to thank at least twice those people who are always there for you: parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, and friends. I thank you, History Department, and David Myers, with all my being, for the wonderful and unbelievable honor you have given to me by allowing me to address all of you. I wish all of you most joyous health and abundant good fortune. Thank you.
Thank you, Meyer, for those extraordinary, sage, inspiring, and wise words, and as has been the case so many times in the past, for your remarkable generosity. And we look forward to picking up the challenge you have placed before us and creating a unique center of excellence that really translates the wisdom of the past into betterment in the present and future. Before you leave us, we would like to bestow upon you our Distinguished Alumnus Award for 2014, which reads as following. The UCLA History Department is pleased to bestow this Distinguished Alumnus Award on Meyer Luskin, History Department alumnus, brilliant businessman, visionary philanthropist, and lover of humanity. Thank you very much, Meyer.
He is going to make me cry.